Good afternoon. Something was coming to me today, and it's really been something I have experienced. I have experienced it in my own personal life, and I think many people that want to be faithful, and so they walk this hard road of being imperfect and making mistakes, but always coming back to God and saying, look, I don't want to do it my way. At first you try to do it your way, it doesn't work out, and then you come back to God and you say, okay, you're God, I'm not. Sort of like Job at the end of Job. But my experience was, I went into my first marriage without consulting God. I thought I knew how to pick the person I wanted to get married to. It's like I didn't need God to help me. I certainly do. Even in these moments with choosing our life, our future. And I gave him years and youth and so much time that God had to deliver us from. It was bondage, basically, for my rebellion. It was actually disobedience because I had a warning. Now I know it was a warning. Now I see it was a warning, but I didn't then. The difficulty is, how many of us do this? How many of us do this? Okay? We go into life thinking we know how to do this, we know how to live our lives, How many young people do you know think they know everything until they don't? Yes, I'm being facetious. I'm being a little snarky here because we don't know what we need. Okay? I like to say that we know what we want. We think we need it. But we don't need that. I mean, a heroin addict thinks they need their next high. And an alcoholic thinks they need that next drink. But we know they don't. We know they don't. Okay? In a clear mind, in the mind of Christ, with a sound mind, we know they don't. But they feel a need, a desperation for it. And we feel a desperation to do things our own way when we're young. It is like what we're born into, some sort of original sin. And it's rebellion. We think we can do it our way. Look at Eve. And look at Adam following Eve. My story comes from the life of Abraham. Somewhat before he was Abraham, when he was Abram. And then after he was Abraham, his wife Sarai then becomes Sarah. And he kind of did that. He kind of followed his wife's instructions. Took another woman into his bed. Had a child by that woman, because Sarah was like, it ain't happening through me, so let's shortcut God and let's do it my way. And Abraham followed her instructions. But I don't believe it was God's will for Ishmael to even be born. He knew he would be born, but it wasn't God's express desire for them to try to shortcut God's promise by doing it their way. But then there was a lot of repercussions from that decision. And the man who tried to please his wife by taking the woman into his bed and conceiving, later has to grieve himself to please that wife again. Let me read the scripture. I'm talking to, and I'll talk to you later about what God asks of us sometimes. But I've done this sort of thing. I have tried to do it my way, and I have paid for it. Who hasn't paid for their youthful indiscretions, Youthful lusts, right? Flee them. But Sarah did too. Abraham did too. For maybe not being the leader he needed to be, and unfortunately, like Eve, following his wife's instructions. So in Genesis chapter 21, I'm going to start at the first verse. And the Lord visited Sarah as he said, and the Lord did unto Sarah as he had spoken. For Sarah conceived and bare Abraham's son in his old age, at the set time of which God had spoken of him. And Abraham called the name of his son that was born unto him, whom Sarah bare to him, Isaac. And Abraham circumcised his son Isaac, being 8 days old, as God had commanded him. And Abraham was 100 years old. And so that when Isaac's son was born unto him, sorry about that, I lost my place. And Sarah said, God hath made me to laugh, so that all will hear me laugh. Because she had laughed when she had heard she was going to have a son. And she denied it, like, no, I didn't. Now she recognizes that God truly did give her joy. And she could laugh not from being sarcastic and cynical, but from pure joy from bearing Isaac. But she was impatient to get there. She went about it the wrong way. And let's go back to the scripture, verse 7. And she said, whom would have said unto Abraham that Sarah should have given children suck? For I have borne him a son in his old age. And the child grew and was weaned. And Abraham made a great feast the same day that Isaac was weaned. And Sarah saw the son of Hagar, the Egyptian, which she had borne unto Abraham, mocking. Wherefore she said unto Abraham, cast out this bondwoman and her son. For the son of this bondwoman shall not be heir with my son, even with Isaac. And the thing was very grievous to Abraham in his sight because of his son. And God said unto Abraham, let it not be grievous in thy sight because of the lad, because of thy bondwoman. In all that Sarah hath said unto thee, hearken unto her voice. For Isaac, shall thy seed be called. God had already told Abraham that his inheritance, or his covenant, would be with Sarah, the joining of Sarah, the first wife, the true wife that God continued to honor. But we don't hear anything about Abraham asking God to choose Sarah. Abraham did it on his own, and Sarah tried to do a few things on her own. And then she got mocked or despised by Hagar, and then mocked by Hagar's son. And then she asks her husband to throw them out of the camp, which grieves her husband. And all of this because she tried to do it her way. And Abraham followed her instructions. But it never should have happened. But God knew it would happen. Why? Because we are faulty people. We are faulty people. Adam did the same thing. He followed his wife into disobedience, doing what God wasn't pleased with. God, can you imagine God walking with Adam in the cool of the day and knowing Adam would do this? But, Christ was slain to redeem everything and everyone, even in marriage. I believe Christ redeems marriage unto God with the church, because, God was married to Israel, and then he gave her a bill of divorcement for being unfaithful in the major prophets. So, if in Jesus dwelled the fullness of the Godhead bodily, perhaps the church is God's second spouse. We don't like to look at it that way because, we should never, it's only one man for the rest, one woman for all of your life. But what if we choose someone who doesn't choose us, or is unfaithful to us, or tries to kill us, or becomes violent? God can still redeem marriage, and I believe he does. Well, that's kind of another story altogether. Maybe I'll do a video segment on that. But here's the thing. Because Abraham was willing to and had to sacrifice one son for Sarah's instructions, and because Sarah represented the, doing it man's way, the way she had, he wouldn't have even had Ishmael if he hadn't listened to Sarah in the first place. And now he's having to kick him out of the camp and lose his child. But because of that, I think God sometimes tests us when we go into some sort of do it in our own way, marrying the person we want, trying to, in some sort of rebellion, shortcut God's will and not submit the choices to him. Sometimes I think we have to go through the second test that Abraham went through. When God sends him up to the mountain with Isaac and says, I want you to sacrifice your son, your only son. You see, it wasn't Abraham's only son. It was the only son that Abraham could embrace and love, because Ishmael was sent away from him. And God tests Abraham. In fact, it actually says God tempts Abraham. Why? Because if Abraham would do that kind of sacrifice for Sarah, why wouldn't he do it for God? Why wouldn't he sacrifice his promise? Because God asked him to. But see, that's the thing Abraham did. With the first child, Abraham had done poorly. He had not followed the covenant as God had laid it out with Sarah, and he had to sacrifice Ishmael. Kind of like sometimes we have to sacrifice the plans we made in thinking we could do it our own way. But with Isaac on the mountaintop, when God's saying, go sacrifice your son, your only son, or he's saying, go sacrifice Isaac, and Abraham's ready. He's going to do it because God told him, He's ready to plunge that knife down, and the angel stops him and says, now I know you have not withheld your son, your only son. Well, it wasn't his only son, but it was the only one he had a chance for relationship with. And he hadn't withheld him from the Lord. Isaac represented a promise. And he still didn't withhold that promise from the Lord. I believe that when we do things the first time in our life, whether it be marriage, whether it be career, whether it be pursuing things like we thought they should go, even if the end goal was a godly ideal, and that ends up something we have to lose, God will test us. I believe he will test us and tempt us to sacrifice that future again, that promise again. Sacrifice for me. I had to sacrifice my past, my dream, my family, because it was abusive and almost killed us. And God tempted me with another situation, another person that I saw some toxic behaviors with. And I started realizing the more I was in contact with this person or trying to see where it was supposed to go, that they literally were using abusive tendencies, gaslighting, condescension, dismissive behaviors, disapproval, even outright lying. And I'm like, Lord, how can this be your will? And he came to me at a moment where I was going to plunge the knife down in all possible future relationships. All men, all relationships. He stopped me and said, this person is the one you need. But they're a player. I didn't understand at that moment. I thought it was I needed to marry that person. But I have come to understand that I needed to sacrifice that man. That was the ram he indicated in the bushes. Because the promise wasn't to come yet. It wasn't ready yet. It wasn't prepared yet. It wasn't the right time. God's time yet for me to be in a relationship, to be in a possible union of godly direction. And I'm not even sure how that's going to play out. But God has given me certain gifts by sacrificing in those moments and sacrificing that relationship, or trying to, do what God was telling me to do. and being submitted. And he gave me certain gifts that I can't deny, that I need a headship. Not because I have to have it, not because I'm desperate for it, not because I need idol worship, but because I need a spiritual protection and covering of headship in my own home. It's hard to explain without bragging. That's not my point. That's not my point at all. It's just I thought God could either, if it's him or singleness, just give me singleness, because I don't want to go back to abuse. But God had a third way. I don't know the future, but I have this promise that he preserved, that I didn't plunge the knife down in that day, because he told me to wait and hold. And he had a substitution, a ram, for me to sacrifice that was in the bushes. So I have faith that my life is not over. The dream has not died. I mean, I know my life is not over, and I know singleness is not, it's not it's not like a punishment. No, actually, I thought, I would be happy single. But God knew there was a young girl that had a desire, not planted by herself, but planted from the Lord. Psalms 37:4 says, "If we delight ourselves in the Lord, he will give us the desires of our heart." I think because the heart is deceitful and deceitfully wicked, and who can know it, and God only knows it, that sometimes he puts the desires in our heart, but they can't be fulfilled in our own way. They have to be fulfilled in his way, in his timing. And you got to get yourself out of the way, hands off the wheel. Jesus, take the wheel. I mean, literally, not even one hand, not even one finger on that wheel. You're like, okay, you got it, I'm not. You take it from here. Because I think that's the moment. I think that's the moment that your promise will bloom to fruition. I truly believe it. Because he wants to give us the desires of our heart. And sometimes he puts a desire in our heart that we can't do it. We can't make it happen. No matter how much we try, no matter how much, planning goes into it, manipulation goes into it, I'm going to control everything. And you can't. We can't control everything. Control is the Lord's. Control is illusion. Just put it out there. Control is illusion. And anybody who tries to control other people can turn abusive. Controlling is bad enough. But if they think they can get away with anything that they need to do to control the situation, it can become abusive. It can become violently abusive. So I suggest hands off the wheel. But don't sacrifice the promise. If God says he's going to give you a ram in the bushes, sacrifice the ram. Don't sacrifice the promise. Don't sacrifice the desire that's been there since you were innocent. Because God plants desires that he wants to fulfill in his way. And I think he's got a way to do it. But we have got to step out of the way. Stop using our reasoning. Stop trying to figure it out. I pray that God blesses you, guys. I think it's hard for certain women to let go of control, but I think it's really hard for guys to let go of control. Because why? You're supposed to be, in control. You're supposed to have it all together. The guys are supposed to, I'm the man, right? Well, don't get wrapped up in the world's way of thinking. They either go from passive man that does whatever she says to I'm the man, you're going to listen to me no matter what. I mean, Paul said all things in moderation. I don't believe true godly manhood is one or the other. I believe that they are like Christ, not controlling, but with godly authority. Have a blessed day in Jesus' name.